Could I ask you all to stand for a minute of reflection in memory of Anton Lubowski? Thank you very much. Thank you. You may be seated. We have a number of distinguished guests with us tonight. Some have come from afar, but none more so than members of the Lubowski family, and I want to welcome you in particular this evening. Thank you for being here. Tonight is a culmination of the dreams, aspirations, and plans of many people. When I approached the university some 4 months ago, I wasn't quite sure what reception I would get with this proposal that we have a memorial lecture, a series of lectures on the life of Anton Theodor Eberhard August Lubowski, and just to remember him. But I needn't have been worried at all, because the university immediately embraced the project. And it has been a wonderful experience working together with them. And here I must give a shout out to the alumni office and to the law faculty. Thank you very much for the way that you've arranged everything for this evening. I first met Anton in 1972. We were first year students in Simonsberg Kosseis, just up the road. We were both allocated to the touwtrek span, the tug of war team, and that's where we met. Tug of war was very important in those days. And Anton immediately stood out. He was tall, he was charismatic, he was outspoken, and yes, at times he was controversial. And within next to no time, his fame spread throughout the Kosseis, but for a totally different reason. Because his mother, Molly, would occasionally send bags of karringmelk biscuit and dry sausage from their farm in Aus in Namibia, or Southwest Africa as it was then. And Anton would share generously with all the students. And that was Anton. He shared. He shared with all of us, and eventually he shared his life for justice and for peace. I'm sorry. Today is exactly 30 years ago that Anton tragically passed. He was 37 years old at the time. I am going to be introducing the speakers one by one as they come up. But first I'm going to ask Professor Nicola Smit, the Dean of this faculty, to say a few words. Nicola?
Good evening, everyone. Goeienaand. Welkom in Stellenbosch. So on behalf of the Faculty of Law, it is my great pleasure to welcome each and every one of you here tonight to this memorial lecture. And in particular, I would like to extend a special warm welcome to Gabrielle Lubowski and other family members seated here on my left-hand front, also friends of the family. I would like to extend a warm welcome, and also, even now, although you haven't done anything yet, extend a special vote of thanks as well to our speakers, Justice Albie Sachs, Max de Pree, Leslie van der Rooij. Thank you very much. And then I want to say a special vote of thanks and welcome to Charles Adams. Charles Adams is really the person who has made this evening happen. I think he has taken a lot of care in the arrangements. He has certainly invested in the success of this evening, and I think, Charles, it is already a success. Thank you for being here and making this happen. Finally, I haven't seen him yet, but I wish to extend a special word of welcome to Mr. Dennis Goldberg as well. So this lecture is of course a collaborative effort, and our partners, alumni and development relations, Simmonsburg residents, and the Frederik van Zyl Slabbert Institute for Student Leadership Development were all part of these arrangements, and I wish to thank them for this collaboration and partnership. Anton Lubowski started his studies in 1972 at Stellenbosch University, but he did not study law. He enrolled for a B Commerce degree, and he transferred to the BA Law degree in 1973. He then subsequently graduated with this degree in 1976, in March. Quite a significant year in the history of South Africa as well. In the 1989 Matiland, one finds a short article about Anton, his background, and of course, his murder. It is stated, amongst other things, that Anton played rugby for the under-20 Maties rugby team, and it's also written that he participated in student politics and in many other student activities. Studentenbedrywighede is die woord wat gebruik word. In the 1998 Matiland, Charles Adams writes a short sketch, a humorous sketch, in which he refers to Anton's powder blue Cortina truck and the abduction of a particularly, it seems, strict disciplinarian prim from Simmonsburg residents. And I assume that this would also qualify as studentenbedrywighede. So, dear guest, as formulated so persuasively by Chimamanda Adichie, we should remember that the single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. And we know, of course, that many stories still remain to be told about our country's history. It is therefore a great honor to be part of this memorial lecture. I thank you for your attention. Professor Wim de Villiers would really have liked to be here tonight. He managed to make a short video message, which we will now play for you. And I will ask Marvin, if I'm going to dim the lights, let's see if we can make this work.
Good evening, everyone. I'm abroad on university business, but I wanted to make an input at this important event, so I decided to pre-record this message. Firstly, on behalf of Stellenbosch University, welcome to the first Anton Lubowski Memorial Lecture. Voordat advokaat Lubowski sy merk in die breër samelewing gemaak het, was hy 'n student hier by Mati, so dit is gepas vir sy alma mater om eer aan hom te betoon. Anton was one of the critical Mati voices we had in mind when we marked our centenary last year. We used it as an opportunity to not only celebrate the university's achievements the past 100 years, but also to acknowledge again the university's contribution to the injustices of the past, which we have deep regret for. We also said we honor critical Mati voices of the time who would not be silenced despite experiencing opposition, progressive voices such as Frederik van Zyl Slabbert, Beyers Nudee, Johan Degenaar, and Anton Lubowski. Matis who challenged injustice and helped build bridges across all kinds of divides in the search for common ground, not only in South Africa, but also beyond. Anton Lubowski het tot sosiale geregtigheid in Namibië bygedra, 'n land met sterk bande met die Universiteit Stellenbosch. Elke jaar studeer meer as 600 Namibiërs hier en daar is tans meer as 5000 afgestudeerdes van die US in Namibië. Mense wat die kennis en vaardighede wat hulle hier verwerf het, tot voordeel van daardie samelewing kan gebruik. That is in line with how we see our role in society today. Stellenbosch University has committed itself unconditionally to the ideal of an inclusive world-class university in and for Africa. And we honor everyone who has helped us reach this point, including Anton Lubowski. We are striving to become a transformed and integrated academic community that celebrates critical thinking, promotes debate, and is committed to democracy, human rights, and social justice. Let's go forward together.
We are really very fortunate tonight to have three excellent speakers with us. The first speaker is Max de Pree. I'm sure Max is known to all of you. Max is a celebrated author, a journalist, and a commentator, and most recently the revived, or should I say the editor of the revived Vrye Weekblad, or the revived editor of the Vrye Weekblad. I'm not sure which. In any case, I'm not sure whether I should address him as doctor tonight, because he received an honorary doctorate from this university last year. So, Max, we're really looking forward to hearing from you. Please join us up here. Ek moet albei aansit. Een is vir video en een is vir audio. Okay. Right.
Lekker is ja. Goeienaand aan almal. Anton Lubowski was my friend, and I am honored tonight to say a few words about him in the presence of Gabi and Nadia and his dear sister. Anton was a passionate, larger-than-life man and a pioneer who lived life to the full. He was just a year younger than me, and we studied at the same university, more or less at the same time, but we never met. In fact, I studied in this very room. I normally sat there. I suspect Anton was a better student than I was. But he was the best company I ever had during the time I spent in Namibia reporting on the United Nations assisted process towards independence. I say this very carefully. Anton and I shared several delightful weaknesses. Anton was a freedom fighter in the proper sense of the word, but he wasn't driven by ideology. He did what he did because of a deep sense of justice and human solidarity. He was a little bit Lubowski and a little bit van der Merwe, but he was a complete African. 2 days after his assassination, 30 years ago, I wrote this about him in Vrye Weekblad at the time. Anton was 'n warm, sagte mens met 'n goeie skoot karisma en 'n oormaat idealisme. Nie die soort mens wat weens politieke haat dood voor sy voordeur behoort te lê nie. Hy het genoeg wagmoed gehad om in 'n gepolariseerde gemeenskap brûe te bou. Hy het dit makliker gemaak vir ander wit Namibiërs om hul vrese en inhibisies agter te laat en deel van die nuwe nasie van Namibië te word. Sy dood moet 'n waarskuwing vir ons almal in hierdie subkontinent wees. Dit is die prys wat ons moet betaal vir dekades van haatpolitiek, onderdrukking en rasseskeiding. Anton verdien 'n plek in die Suid-Afrikaanse helderakker langs die Steve Biko's, Victoria Mkenge's, Rick Turner's and David Webster's. By the way, it is today exactly 42 years ago that Steve Biko was killed by the apartheid state. Anton's assassination was investigated by the Truth Commission, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. His parents and his sister gave testimony at the hearings. Now, I was, you may remember, fairly intimately involved with the TRC proceedings. And I still view that initiative as profound and very important in our history. But one of the biggest failings of the post-1994 governments was that they never prosecuted those identified apartheid killers and torturers who never did ask or never got amnesty. There was abundant evidence that the conspiracy to assassinate Anton was perpetrated in South Africa. All the names of the conspirators are known. It's an outrage that they were never prosecuted. I still don't understand the government's haste to move on from the Truth Commission, to declare it yesterday's business. This undermined the value of the Truth Commission experience and indeed our national sense of justice. Perhaps this neglect to bring those murderers to justice is partly to blame for the culture of impunity that we're still experiencing right now. Die laaste keer wat ek vir Anton gesien het, was die 11de September 1989 op 'n televisie nuusbulletin. En ek het die nuus aangesit en die SWAPO-bandelinge het aangekom, Windhoek se lughawe. En daar was die lang man met die mooi boshare en hy het almal omhels. En dit was die dag voor sy dood. I was so outraged by the news of his assassination that I swore that we would unmask his killers. We had no doubt, of course, that they were members of the South African security forces. So I was the editor of Vrye Weekblad at the time, and I called in my team that very morning and said, we are going to smoke these guys out. Now, the digging that we launched then, the investigations that we launched then, led us to exposing, just 2 months later, on the 17th of November 1989, the existence of the South African police squad at Vlakplaas, under first Dirk Coetzee and then Eugene de Kock, and eventually also to the unmasking of the South African Defence Force clandestine units, the Civil Cooperation Bureau, and the Directorate Covert Collection. Dit was baie belangrik vir 'n Afrikaanstalige koerant om op hierdie manier vir mense te wys dat apartheid was nie 'n vreedsame beleid wat misverstaan is. Dit was nie vreedsame naasbestaan van etniese groepe nie. Maar dit was 'n bose en gewelddadige ideologie. It could not exist without humiliation, without torture, and without killing. And I thought at the time that Anton, my friend, would have appreciated the fact that his death triggered this search for the truth about what the South African regime pre-1994 really stood for. This holding up of the mirror to white South Africans to look into. Anton was a fierce Namibian patriot, but he also had one foot in South Africa, and he served as an inspiration to many young white South Africans to stand up for justice. He didn't join SWAPO because he had a white skin, but in the reality of our subcontinent at the time, he could never escape the fact that he wasn't as black as his comrades. Like other giants before him, people like Bram Fischer, Beyers Naudé, Albie Sachs, Dennis Goldberg, lovely to see you here. He embodied the essence of non-racialism. The idea that while we cannot deny the existence of race in terms of history and lived experience, we should constantly strive to overcome it as an absolute determinant of political loyalty and participation. I learned what non-racialism meant from the only real political home that I ever had, the United Democratic Front. There is very little of that concept left in South Africa of 2019. This is partly due to the rapid rise of populism and racial nationalism over the last few years, but also because too few in the white community have put their bodies on the side of the struggles of the majority. Too many whites are in full-on fight-back mode, while AfriForum and its ilk are creating a new sense of white victimhood and Afrikaner exceptionalism. These people's attitude seems to be that reconciliation, nation building, and non-racialism are exclusively black obligations. That certainly cannot be. I think South Africa's hard-won democracy is today under threat. But the threat is not from a military takeover or a popular uprising. Our democracy is being undermined by democratically elected politicians, and they are using the instruments and institutions of democracy to stab our democracy in its heart. I read a book recently on failing democracies, and the guy used this phrase. He said, democratic backsliding today begins at the ballot box. And this is also true, of course, of countries like the Philippines and Russia and Turkey and Venezuela and Hungary, and of course, Zimbabwe. We're even seeing signs of this in the United Kingdom and in the United States. So at the root of the creeping authoritarianism in most of these societies, we see a narrow ethnic nationalism and cheap populism appealing to citizens' most base instincts. This is also true of our society. We are witnessing these tendencies with the EFF, with the Magashule faction of the ANC, and with some smaller militant groupings. These people pay lip service to the Freedom Charter and to our magnificent Constitution, but they violate these principles on a daily basis. If you reject the preamble and the founding provisions in Chapter 1 of our Constitution, surely you reject the entire document. The fundamental principle of free speech is now being used to undermine free speech. The intimidation of and violent threats against journalists are a serious threat to our open societies. Open society. You know, a lot of studies have been done in recent years on why states fail. And what all the researchers found, the consensus that they reach, is that open societies never become failed states. But what we've learned in the last few years is that that openness can be systematically destroyed, and then all bets are off. Media freedom is a precondition for an open society. Anton Lubowski was a lawyer, and in all the time I knew him, he was an ardent campaigner in words and in action for the rule of law. If the rule of law goes, freedom and democracy go, as we witnessed in Zimbabwe. The independence and the stature of the judiciary are absolutely crucial. I think the most disturbing development in recent years is the present assault on our judiciary by elected politicians. If a judge makes a finding against you, he or she is either racist if he's white, or he's incompetent if he's black or she's black. During the last week, we have seen an extraordinary campaign, unprecedented campaign on social media that wants us to believe that many of our judges and even the head of our National Prosecuting Authority had been bought off by politicians. This is such a serious charge that the Chief Justice is gathering all the heads of our courts tomorrow afternoon to talk about this to the nation in a press conference. There's no clear proof who is behind this campaign, but all my journalistic and political instincts tell me we should ask which powerful people face imminent prosecution for corruption and abuse of power. In whose interest is it that the prosecuting authority and the judiciary be discredited now? I'll be nice to the university and not give the answer to that question. The other hat that I wear apart from being a journalist, is that of an historian. I specialize in the pre-colonial and early colonial history of the Basotho, where I come from. I'm from the Free State. So I researched for years the life and times and teaching of an extraordinary chief and philosopher, Chief Mohlomi, who actually died before the first white settlers arrived in what is today the Free State and Lesotho. He never met a white person in his life by the time he died. But Chief Mohlomi ran a leadership academy for young chiefs in the late 1700s. And one of his students was the later famous King Moshoeshoe. So one of the Mohlomi wisdoms that survived was the statement, "Peace is my sister." So in the fiercely patriarchal society of his time, young women were extremely vulnerable. And a real man, he said, saw it as his duty to nurture and protect, to fight for his sister. Likewise, he said, peace needed campaigning for. In that very same sense, we should today say, democracy is my sister. It will be attacked and abused if we don't actively nurture and protect it. Thank you.
Bye, Donkey Max. Can I just make sure that all your cell phones are off, please? Just make sure. It is now a great privilege of mine to introduce one of South Africa's favorite sons. A retired constitutional judge, Albie Sachs, needs very little introduction. We all know about him. He's a jurist, he is an author, he's an academic, he's an art curator, he's many things, but I think in his heart of hearts, he remains a freedom fighter. And so, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, Judge Albie Sachs.
And it's wonderful for me to have another freedom fighter of my generation in the room. Dennis, would you mind standing up? Dennis Goldberg. You know, we imagined the unimaginable. But it was even more unimaginable to imagine that the two of us one day would find ourselves at Stellenbosch University. I'm going to start with something that couldn't be more banal. Buying a motor car. I'm in Mozambique, and very strangely, most of my work as a lawyer, I didn't take any fees, but suddenly there's gold almost falling into my hands. I had two hands then. Lonro, wanting to cozy up to the newly independent government of Zimbabwe, was suing BP Shell for violating sanctions when Lonro didn't do that. And they needed an expert on Mozambican law who could speak English. I was the only person in the whole world who knew something about Mozambican law after independence, the new revolution, old Portuguese law still there. And I wrote an opinion. And the attorney who was appearing for Lonro said, send in your fee. Well, that's very nice. $1,000, $2,000. Let's make it 4. Went to sleep. I asked for $10,000. I'd never had that luxury in my life before, and I wanted to buy a car. And it just so happened, the only new car that I could get for $10,000 was a left-hand drive Honda, a red Honda. And so I bought it. I'm going to follow that with the most difficult speech I've ever made. From the banal to the almost impossible. It was at the Center for African Studies at the University of Eduardo Mondlane to honor Ruth First, who'd been killed a week before by a letter bomb sent from South Africa to her. It was difficult because we were grieving so much. This brilliant intellectual, this person who attacked life ideas, stood up to men in terms of theory, blown up. And I'm speaking in Portuguese. And I come up with some phrases, and Harold Warpy said, Ruth would have hated, cut down in her finest flower. And I decide the interesting thing about Ruth, the most interesting thing, related to, she was giving a paper on contradictions at a United Nations seminar at the Center for African Rights, Center for Human Rights, a little while before. And she said, when you discuss the peasantry in Mozambique, you don't do it from an abstract point of view. You engage with them, and you especially try to learn about the contradictions in their lives. The peasantry aren't an abstraction. There are peasants who live near to the water, who live far from the water. There are male peasants and there are female peasants. There are wealthier peasants and there are poorer peasants. Look for the contradictions. And I thought, look for the contradictions in the life of Ruth. And the first contradiction was, she was a white person in a black movement. How did she resolve that contradiction? Not by denying her whiteness or conducting herself as though she were a black person, but by using the privileges she got that came with her white skin to feed into the struggle of the whole society for transformation and change. She dressed beautifully, very different from most of us. We wanted to dress badly to show we were real comrades. And the women in the struggle appreciated that. If they had access to the possibility of decent clothes, they would have bought decent clothes. They felt patronized by trying to be like the masses. Her second contradiction was she was a relatively well-off person in a movement overwhelmingly of poor people denied. And again, how did she resolve that contradiction? The benefits that she got from the fact she could travel, she could meet people, she could buy books, she would feed into the struggle, she would share as much as she could. The third contradiction, she was a woman in a male-dominated movement. And that was the one contradiction she never fully managed to resolve. She wrote a beautiful book with somebody else, an Olive Schreiner, who also didn't manage to resolve. That brilliant writer, Ruth, that brilliant intellectual, who, as I said, engaged men not only with oratory. We had many great orators. Lillian Ngoyi was a great speaker. Hilda Bernstein was a great speaker. She engaged men at the level of ideas, of theory, of abstraction. And yet she always felt a certain inadequacy, which we couldn't believe. She was so powerful, she was so strong, and she'd been wiped out by this bomb that blew away her whole face. It was ghastly. I move forward to my car. It's the 7th of April, 1988. 7th of April was Dia de Mulher Mozambicana, the Day of the Mozambican Woman. It's like our August the 9th. It was the day that Josina Michel had died of illness, but she had insisted on the right as an African woman to bear arms and had to overcome the patriarchal attitudes that it's only the men who fight and the women must look after the men. And she became a heroine, a symbol, and she took part in the armed struggle as herself. And when she died, that became the day of the affirmation, the day of the emancipation, Emancipação da Mulher. And I'm getting into my red Honda. Boom! Something terrible's happening. I don't know what it is. I'm in total darkness. I used to be a very active mountain climber, and sometimes my head would hit an overhang, blackout, but the blackout didn't disappear. And I hear a voice in the darkness saying, Albie, this is Eva Garrido, you're in Maputo Central Hospital. Your arm is in lamentable condition. You must face the future with courage. And I say, what happened? And a woman's voice said it was a car bomb. I faint back into obscurity, but with a sense of joy. I know I'm safe. I know I'm not being kidnapped and taken to South Africa to be thrown into jail. And with a sense of jubilation, that moment every freedom fighter is waiting for. Will they come for me? Will they come today? If they come for me, will I be strong? And they tried to kill me, and I'd survived. Some time passes. I'm lying on my back. I'm feeling very, very light. I don't quite know where I am, what's happening, but I tell myself a joke. Some of you have heard me tell this story before. You'll hear it again. And it's about Jaime Coward. Like me, he's a Jew. He falls off a bus, and he gets up, and he makes this gesture, and his friend says, Jaime, I didn't know you were Catholic. What do you mean Catholic? Spectacles, testicles, wallet and watch. And I started with testicles for some reason, seemed to be in order. And I have tried all my life without success to be macho. I became a hero in the ANC camps for my 15 minutes. The first thing Comrade Albie did was reach for his balls. Wallet, my heart seems to be okay. If there's damage to my brain, that's serious. There was a crater there, but spectacles seemed okay. Watch, I've lost an arm. I've only lost an arm. And I had that total conviction that as I got better, my country would get better. It wasn't based on evidence, it was just that total conviction. I fast forward back to the banal. I'm a judge just been appointed by Mandela to the Constitutional Court of South Africa. And the Department of Justice officials say Justice Sachs, or Judge. I'm still not used to being called Judge. I think they're speaking to someone else. What kind of car would you like? Would you like a Mercedes or a BMW? And I say, I would like a red Honda, please. And after Chaskelson, the Chief Justice, being given the same choice, he went for a Toyota. My generation, we hated Mercedes because it was a symbol, the Wabenzi. John Didcot, a Ford prefect. Kato Reagan, she had 2 young children, husband, dogs to jump in the back. She wanted a station wagon. They couldn't believe it. A judge driving a station wagon? And I especially wanted a red Honda. It was my, if you like, joke with destiny, with history. Ultimately, as a judge, through the Truth Commission, I'm put in touch with Henry van der Westhuizen. I suppose if one could choose one's assassin, Henry was a much better person to choose than some of the others, in the sense that he went to the Truth Commission. And he saw me before he went to the Truth Commission. He had, it's a mixture of guts and pragmatism. And it was an extraordinary conversation between us. And eventually he tells me he had great parents, he went to the Potchefstroom University, Christian higher education. He did very well. He rose up in the ranks. He's expecting me to say, well done, to become one of the heads of the hit squad. But he explains the operation against me, and that it was postponed for various reasons. He was off the project, he was moved off, and afterwards, when I was blown up, he knew it was something that he'd started. And I say, Henry, normally when I say goodbye to someone, I shake that person's hand. I can't shake your hand. But go to the Truth Commission, tell them what you know, and who knows, maybe we'll meet one day. And I forget about him. And some time passes. It's later on in the year. The Isidingo Soapy people are having a party. The music is very loud. I go with my friend, and I hear a voice saying, Albie. I look around. I can't believe it, it's Henry. He's beaming. And he said, I went to the Truth Commission and I spoke to Bobby and Sue and Farouk. Bobby was the one who'd written a note to me about, don't worry, Comrade Albie, we will avenge you. And it made me think, avenge me? We want to cut off the arms, we want to blind in one eye. Is that the kind of country we want? If we get freedom, if we get democracy in South Africa, that will be my soft vengeance. Roses and lilies will grow out of my arms. So thank you, Bobby, for giving me the chance to come up with that idea. And I told them everything I knew, and you said one day, and I put out my hand, and I shook his hand. He went away beaming, elated. I almost fainted. It was all spontaneous. He's not my friend. I won't phone him up and say, let's go to a movie or have a curry. But if I'm sitting in a bus and he sits down next to me, I'll be curious to know how he's getting on. And he made a contribution. He was one of only 2 military people who went to the Truth Commission. And he helped South African security with quite important information in relation to other parts of Africa. And we're living in the same country now. He's not my friend, but we're both living in the same country, accepting the same basic moral values. I'm sitting in our wonderful new court building on Constitution Hill. It's the old Fort Prison in Johannesburg. Dennis, I don't think, were you in the fort?
Sorry?
Did you ever go to the Fort Prison?
Never.
Okay.
Oh, well, I spent a couple of nights there.
Okay, no, that's enough. That's enough. It's enough. We claim you. We claim you. And that's where we put up our constitutional court. In the heart of the prison, we brag. We South Africans have the only prison in the world where both Gandhi and Mandela were locked up. Nobody else can make that claim. And we chose that site. It was Johan Krechler and I who wanted that site because of its history. Turning the negativity into positivity. Turning the sword into a plowshare. Turning the spear into a pruning hook. Deliberately keeping the old prisons there as a reminder never again, but also implanting the court, a beautiful building with wonderful artwork, to say, don't remain trapped in the past. See the connections, as Max was saying so beautifully, between the past and what we need to achieve. And one of the most difficult cases emotionally for me was the case involving Wouter Besson, so-called Dr. Death. And he's been acquitted of all charges in the High Court by Justice Hartzenberg, and quite serious charges against him. Justice Hartzenberg said a South African court can't try those cases because they were going to be committed. The planning was in South Africa to be committed outside of South Africa. And I see Wouter Besson having the time of his life. He's walking up and down, he's full of smiles, he's chatting to his counsel. And it comes to my turn to ask questions. And I say, Dr. Besson is a liar. We know he's a liar because he tells us himself he's a liar. He said all those farms that he'd bought, and the pleasure resort and the hotel, were registered in his name, but he was holding them for an East German spy and a Russian spy. So he was acknowledging that he'd given a false name. There's dead silence in the court. And we break for tea, and one of my colleagues said, Albie, you had no right to speak about Dr. Besson like that. And I said, I won't give his name. I said, you're absolutely correct. It was improper for me to do that, but I wasn't sorry. I agreed it was improper, and he stopped smirking. He stopped smirking after that. He stopped smirking. And for the record, we did not acquit Wouter Besson. The Constitutional Court did not acquit Wouter Besson. It said we couldn't interfere with the factual findings made by the High Court judge, but the High Court judge was wrong to say that he couldn't be tried. And in giving my decision, I stressed the mere fact that he's charged with horrendous actions of asphyxiating people with a drug so that they can be flown in light planes over the sea and thrown into the water, a ghastly perversion of medical skills for cruel, inhuman ends, doesn't mean that he's not entitled to a fair trial. If anything, it's all the more reason to give a fair trial. You don't take your morality from the people who've just tried to destroy the principal things you're fighting for. On the contrary, you want to emphasize the distance between your view of the world, your morality, the things you're fighting for, the things you believe in, and the horrid, anti-human, racist, cruel vision of the world. Doesn't mean technicalities must prevail, but in essence that core element of fairness has to be there, and in that sense, Dr. Besson has a right to a fair trial. In the end, the prosecution decided that they just didn't have enough credible evidence, given the findings by Justice Hartzenberg, to go ahead with the prosecution. The Constitutional Court did not acquit Dr. Besson or hold that he was not guilty. I'm speaking quite a lot about the Constitution because the second part of my presentation is about what I believe the contribution made by Anton Lubowski to our constitutional order in South Africa. And thinking about it, it's more profound. I sensed it before. Why did I have such a feeling for this guy? We lost lots of people. I'd never met him. I noticed there's a difference between Anton and Anton. The person I know is Anton. Even when Wim de Villiers was speaking in English, he called him Anton. But Anton was your mate. Anton was part of your community. In that sense, Anton came from the Boere section of our society, which made his being a rebel, in a sense, particularly poignant and sharp and significant, and particularly valuable in terms of the contribution it made. Because the triumph of the notion of non-racism in terms of our constitutional projection didn't come about because it's a beautiful idea, because wouldn't it be wonderful? It came about because people were fighting side by side with common ideals, common aspirations, common risks, common dread. It was forged, we use that word forged a lot, through the energies and the risks taken and the commitment of so many people. And particularly significant that if the commands that we heard in jail were in the Afrikaans language, amongst the freedom fighters was somebody whose first language was Afrikaans. It was so important to help establish the principle. And not you doing it to establish a principle, you're doing it from your heart, because that's who you are, that's what you want to be, that's what matters. And also, you find you're being embraced by the struggle. People respond with, if you like, almost a special warmth, because you are breaking out of the worldview and the patterns of the society you're in. Sometimes you get asked, why did you give up your privilege? And it's not giving up privilege. It's enjoying the privilege of being part of a freedom struggle, a privilege of discovering humanity, a privilege of opening horizons and imagining things that seemed unimaginable. That's much more privilege than having a Mercedes-Benz or a big watch or a powerful position. So Anton's contribution in Namibia had a knock-on effect disproportionately huge and significant in terms of every life is just a life of a person. Even the timing of it. We take so much for granted in terms of our democratic institutions, as though they were kind of automatic, easygoing. The whole project in Southern Africa until then had been based on ethnicity, domination, division. And now, instead of speaking about white supremacy, the conversation was changing to power sharing. Power sharing between whom? Between racial groups. And the whole constitutional project was being projected as power sharing between different ethnic groups. In South Africa, it would have meant, and this went on right till 1992 in our negotiations, deep into CODESA, it led to the breakdown. We would have had 3 presidents. Mandela on Monday, de Klerk on Tuesday, Buthelezi on Wednesday. In fact, it would have been 1 year, 1 year, 1 year. They would have to get consensus, which would have been impossible, and it would have given the whites a minority veto. The Constitution would have been seen as the barrier to black advancement, as the enemy of progress. Namibia adopted a non-racial constitution. Namibia went for elections to create a parliament which would then draft the constitution. It wasn't power sharing. There were political parties arguing for their positions, but it was based on the notion of common citizenship. I'm sometimes asked about, Albie, what did the South African Constitution get from constitutions elsewhere in the world? And my answer, in a way, is a diplomatic one. Well, I say, well, from the United States, we got separation of powers, the whole idea of constitutionalism. From Canada, we got a Bill of Rights. From Germany, we got cooperative governance and the idea of a constitutional court. From India, we got the Finance Commission. But the most important of all was from Namibia, the non-racial foundation in an African country of constitutionalism. We take it for granted. But we got more than that. And Anton's life, his actions, his commitment, and his death. I say death, not passing, his death. It involved passing, but it was a specific form of culmination of his life, but a form that was so dramatic and so significant and so meaningful in terms of asserting and affirming the total commitment of a person as a human being who happened to be white to the freedom struggle at a time when serious discussions about negotiations, the future of Namibia, are taking place. And Namibia gave us more than that. It gave us the roadmap for our constitution-making process. Namibia had a United Nations document that was called it was the Holy Cow. A few simple principles. We adopted 34 principles that had to be agreed to. And even more than that, a certain Arthur Chaskelson went to Namibia to help the technical drafting of the Constitution. Thank you, Namibian. We started out of town. We had a dry run in a way. That wasn't his motive. But it gave him the confidence, the authority, the aplomb, and being a great lawyer, and being a lawyer with compassion and a broad vision, not narrow-minded, not politically oriented in that narrow way. He was able to work well with other colleagues, I think some from Stellenbosch University as well, in the drafting of that constitution. And more than that, Ismail Mohammed was the chief legal advisor, constitutional advisor to SWAPO, became a judge as well, getting a trial run for coming onto our Constitutional Court bench. And so the non-racial principle, in a way, is not simply an abstraction, but people of different backgrounds, from different faith communities, are invested in the creation of the Namibian Constitution, which opened the way to the mechanism, the manner, the modalities of the creation of the South African Constitution. I'm not suggesting that Anton is the progenitor of our Constitution. Clearly, it's not that kind of connection. It's a connection, if you like, of history, of personality, of energy, at a particular time that leads to a confluence, a congruence of events and people and personalities to produce the Namibian Constitution and later on our South African Constitution. So in that case, dealing with so-called Dr. Death, these things are coming full circle. The agony of Namibia is being played out in a South African court, upholding constitutional values in a dignified way, in a principled way. And we have now established styles of work, institutions, sets of values that place us amongst leaders in the world. We leaders in the world in terms of lots of negative things, I won't go through them. But in terms of beautiful things, South Africa, Southern Africa, Namibia, have created marvels. The easy way to recognize that would be through the personality of Nelson Mandela. And it was so overdone that it ended up actually reducing his qualities and creating a kind of mega human being outside of history, outside of reality, so that other countries say, if only we had a Mandela, then we could solve all these problems. It wasn't. It was millions and millions of people in different ways making their contributions. And it's wonderful for me, that it's here at the University of Stellenbosch that the honor is being paid, that I can say these things and share these things with yourselves, not thinking, what's a clever way that I can use to smuggle in a progressive idea so that people might agree to it, not even realizing that they're betraying their real beliefs. But I can say it because I sense people have moved on and are moving on and are creating new things. The university is struggling with all the contradictions, all the tensions, but trying to find ways forward. It's been very wonderful meeting Anton's very closest and dearest. I'm having lunch with them and I'm always asking, what are you doing here? And discovering that you're here to remember, to recall. Would you mind if I asked you to stand up? The three of you. Two sisters. The sisters. Okay. Can we give them a... I wish the University of Stellenbosch well in its difficult struggles, dealing with complicated interrelation, the contradictions that Ruth first was speaking about. I wish you would add to your list of honored alumni certain Constitutional Court judges. And it's not an accident. Things were so terrible here that it produced wonderful opposition. And so we had this marvelous occasion saying farewell to Edwin Cameron. This is where he became an activist. We've still got one judge on the court at the moment. So feel proud, University of Stellenbosch, not only of the changes that you're making, but of the rebels who became creators of our new South Africa. And of course, feel proud of your association with Anton Lubowski. He's one of the heroes of South Africa, one of the heroes of our democracy, one of the heroes of idealism, of hope, one of the heroes of demanding the best from the world, the best from ourselves, the best from the people around us. Thank you. Can you open this? I've brought this to present to the University of Stellenbosch, and I'm going to write at the bottom in honor of Anton Lubowski.
I'm getting more tangled up here. Wow, thank you very much, George. That was amazing. I'm sure you'll agree with me that the insights that the Judge has and just sharing from his experience is very remarkable, and that's why I think he will be loved by this nation for many years to come. Thank you for your contribution. Our next speaker is Dr. Leslie Van Roy. Leslie has probably got the most difficult job that has. His title is Senior Director, Social Impact and Transformation. He previously headed up the Frederick Marcellus London Institute for Leadership, and he's currently, and this to me is significant, he's currently the resident head of Simonsberg Courses, which is Anton LaBeouf. Really like to hear from you. Thank you.
So if you think that the transformation job is difficult, you should try being resident head of Simonsberg. Different kettle of fish. And I really have a tough act to follow, so I know I also have the sympathy of the crowd tonight. May I, on behalf of the university, Nicola, just say thank you for this fantastic gift, Justice Sachs, that we're in the middle of a visual redress process also in this faculty, and it is a fitting gift that I hope Nicola can be housed and showcased in this faculty. And then I must also say that Justice Cameron is just down the road this evening, 50 meters from here. He's in the University Museum, so we're surrounded by justices this evening, and I think, as a university community, we're very grateful for that. Mine will be a story of myself in two worlds. The one is in Uppington, where I grew up, and I'll connect my story to that of Anton Lubowski. And the other is, of course, given my role at Stellenbosch, and specifically my role in Simonsberg. So I'll connect the two stories. It is a cold winter's evening in Uppington. The smoke hangs low over the Orange River Valley. Fires are made at homes of the town's residents in the bitterly cold weather in the semi-desert region. The majority of the townspeople have to burn wood or coal to stay warm to get through the night. But it is not as quiet as usual. It is clear that the town's so-called black township, Przybylo, that in that area things are not at ease. Struggle songs, toy-toying, gunshots, etc. can be heard tonight. Clearly tension is in the air. Protests have now erupted, and it is clear that the oppressive system of the time can no longer hold the townsfolk back. It is the winter of 1986. A couple of months earlier, a police officer was killed in Przybylo. Lucas Setwala was killed on the 13th of November 1985. A typical event of the time in South Africa plays off them. And I'll quote a number of sections from the book that I think some of you might know by Andrea Durbach on the Uppington 25, where, of course, Anton, in the trial, Anton played a pivotal role. During the early part of 1985, classes at the Przybylo High School were boycotted by students who had complained to no avail about the poorly qualified teachers. In the latter half of 1985, discontented youths of the township established the Uppington Youth Organization, something very similar in the story of the day, of course, in the context of South Africa, played off in a number of townships. The UYO was keen to hold a meeting between the youth and the older members of the community to discuss issues affecting the lives of the Przybylo residents and possible avenues for their resolution, of course. The UYO youth had little confidence in the town council, the Przybylo town council, and its elected councillors, and really didn't think that the issues would be addressed satisfactorily. The holding of a public meeting to air their grievances relating to, amongst others, inadequate roads and lighting, incidents of alcoholism and crime in the township was its preferred option. But during the afternoon of Sunday, the 10th of November 1985, a meeting was held in Przybylo at the community hall, the J. Shimane Hall. The hall still exists. The hall at that stage had seating for 700 people, and it was absolutely packed. The meeting was addressed by various residents who talked of the poor township conditions. The issues of house rents, the use of alcohol by school children were highlighted and discussed and debated at length. The meeting, of course, also raised the role of the Przybylo Municipal Police. Setwala, of course, was a police officer, and in particular, their malicious intimidation of informal traders trying to make a living in the small town. Residents complained that some of the policemen had confiscated meat from hawkers and emptied paraffin from tins on sale. The conduct, specifically of Lucas Setwala and fellow policeman Desmond Nduli, was singled out in particular. After the meeting, the group decided to leave the hall, go to a soccer field where two rival teams were playing, and decided to disrupt the soccer event on the day. The police came in, and the police stopped the event quite violently, and it started throwing of rocks and a number of other events that on that evening played off. The tension between residents and the police continued on the Monday and the Tuesday, and the Captain Botha, in charge of the local South African Police Unrest Unit, believed that the situation in the township warranted external assistance, and he sought the help of Captain van Dijk and his riot squad unit from Kimberley. Captain van Dijk didn't hesitate to come, and the following morning at about 6 o'clock, his team arrived in Przybylo and indicated that over a loudspeaker that he is here to restore order, to protect the citizens, to make sure that everyone feels safe, and that indeed the town would be able to function. Late that night, police shot and killed a pregnant woman, Przybylo resident, and they allegedly had committed, and she allegedly committed an act of public violence. It meant that it was a tense evening in the town. And somehow the residents heard that the next morning at about 6 o'clock there would be a town gathering in the local soccer stadium again. And so by 6:30 about 3,000 people were seated in the soccer stadium wanting to know what the news of the day would be. At approximately 6:45 a.m., a Casper, a well-known Casper, under the command of Captain Botha, arrived and parked at the edge of the soccer field. And a few minutes later, Captain Botha issued a loudspeaker warning in both English and Afrikaans that the gathering was illegal, of course, in terms of the then Internal Security Act. He ordered the meeting to disperse, giving the crowd 10 minutes to clear the field. The crowd then decided that they would start to sing. Of course, Isikelele Africa was sung, and realized that this clearly would mean that a standoff is about to play out. In the middle of this, a pastor, just after the singing of the Nkosi, pastor began to pray, and whilst praying, Captain Botha announced that the 10 minutes had almost expired and warned that force would be used against the people if they failed to disperse. The crowd failed to disperse. And at the conclusion of the prayer, as the pastor said, Amen, police fired tear gas canisters into the crowd. And of course, the crowd ran in various directions in the Pablelo township. And at that stage, of course, was also looking for those that they thought were perpetrators, and specifically the policemen. And one of the routes that they dispersed to was Pilane Street, in which stood the house number 405, that of Lucas Setwala. Some of the people in Pilane Street began to throw stones at the houses, and about 100, 200 people gathered in front of the gate of house 405 and shouted chants and threw stones. Lucas Setwala then decided to run to house 407, and the owner of 407 at the stage said, well, you have to leave. Given the circumstances, I do not feel safe, and I suggest that you leave. He left, firing shots in the air. And as he turned from Pilane Street into Imali Street, he was chased by a group of people onto an open piece of land near the Shemane Hall. And as he reached what was known in Uppington as the Green Post Office houses, prefabricated structures at that stage belonging to the post office, he was caught and knocked to the ground. State witness during the trial to follow indicated that Mr. Setwala was grabbed, beaten, struck by a rock, and later, of course, set on fire, something that at that stage played off in the context of South Africa quite regularly. Evidence led at the trial was the group of about 60 people kicked, stabbed and threw stones at the body. The police received a report that Setwala had been fatally injured and made their way to the scene at approximately 10 minutes past 8. And then the story connects to the district surgeon in the town, who, given the nature of the trial, had to examine and do a post-mortem at that stage. And Dr. Eckstein, a very famous district surgeon at the time, then had to determine cause of death. Dr. Eckstein, however, failed to perform a vital test on Setwala, which would have determined beyond a reasonable doubt that he had already died at the time he was set alight. Had he done so, the trial at that stage would have most probably turned out differently. 26 accused were charged with the unlawful and intentional murder of Lucas Setwala on the 13th of November. And the charge sheet read that they participated in an unruly gathering, having in their possession certain weapons such as petrol bombs, cans, bottles, stones, and other weapons. They incited each other to attack the house of Mr. Setwala and killed him, that they attacked and damaged the house and or threatened and endangered the lives and bodily integrity of Mr. Setwala, and that Lucas Setwala had died as a result of the injuries. The trial commenced in Uppington in 1986, in October of 1986, and was a relatively, of course emotional, but a relatively short trial. And in the end, all of the accused except one was found guilty. And of course, at that stage, if you were found guilty of murder, the implications was that you could not live very long thereafter. And this is where Anton Lubowski comes into the picture. At that stage, it was determined that the trial was a bit of a whitewash. The defense really could not do a proper case, was not allowed to do so. The judge at the time ruled that he would like to finish the case as soon as possible, and it was clear that the lives of at least 25 of the 26 would in the end be in danger, as they could be sentenced to death. Anton, of course, and over the next couple of months and a couple of years, the trial played out, and Anton, of course, started playing the central role until his death in making sure that at least a fair trial would be possible, and that where possible, the lives of the accused were saved. In the end, 14 of the accused was found guilty, but given the positioning of Lubowski and the role that the defense team played, and none of the accused were hanged, and the sentences later overturned in the new dispensation. What would follow was the trial that would now be known as the trial of the Uppington 25, 26 accused and 25 convicted of murder. 12 September 1989, in the middle of the trial, Anton Lubowski, a key role player in the trial, was shot and killed. He was the same age as I am now. Anton himself comes from Kanon-eiland, just outside of Uppington, like me. When one reads the book of Durbach, you become aware of a number of things, amongst others, of course, the brutality of the system of the time, the anger of the people and the effect, the legal system and the juggles between being fair and being unfair, to name a few, and of course, Lubowski's role. Connected to my personal story, there are three role players that stand out in particular, and I'll share some information of the three. One is, of course, Anton Lubowski. The second is about this Dr. Jacobus Ekstein, and the third is about Reverend Aubrey Bekes, mentioned a number of times in the book. I'll reflect on the life of Anton a bit later, but I'll stand still at the lives of Ekstein and Bekes for a while. Dr. Ekstein played a pivotal role in Uppington, both in the investigation and, of course, as a medical practitioner. The same Ekstein would guide my mother through birth of her oldest child, which is, of course, me. It was a bit of a difficult birth, and my mother always reminds me that he saved my life. In 2012, the grandson of Ekstein, you would remember, also called Jacobus Ekstein, would be sentenced to 30 years imprisonment after he killed Aaron van Rensburg in 2009. At that stage, both of them studied at Stellenbosch. A key role player in the trial was the late Dominee Aubrey Bekes, the then minister of the Dutch Reformed Mission Church in Uppington, today the Uniting Reformed Church. Dominee Bekes supported the Uppington 25 and their families, and was renowned for the anti-apartheid struggle hero, of being a struggle hero in the town of Uppington at that stage. And Bekes, like a number of others, influenced a number of us to make sure that perhaps theology would be an option for us. Max, I'm not too sure if that was the right decision all those years ago. And then I turned to Anton Lubowski in Simonsberg. It is January 1972, and as it is today, it was then a warm summer's day in Stellenbosch. Anton Lubowski starts his studies at Stellenbosch University and walks into Simonsberg residence, where I'm currently the residence head. He arrives a year after a son of Uppington left the residence to take up his MB-CHP studies at our medical faculty. The student was none other than Jacobus Ekstein, also a son of Uppington, the son of the district surgeon. Little would they know that their paths indirectly or directly would cross. Van Zyl Slabbert would just have retired as residence head of Simonsberg, but his stories would influence and still influences the narratives of what is called Die Withuis, or the White House, a nickname given to the residents given the fact that his structures resemble something of the White House in Washington. A couple of years earlier, in 1966, the late Senator Robert Kennedy would visit the residence as part of his Ripple of Hope tour to South Africa in June 1996, a couple of months, of course, before the assassination of Hendrik Verwoerd. The House Committee of the time, led by Willem van Drimmelen, had to make a tough decision that I realized would have implications either way. They would invite Kennedy to visit Stellenbosch University and specifically Simonsberg residence, and if they would do so, they could stand the chance, of course, of being disciplined and perhaps expelled from the university. Would they not? Perhaps they would have sacrificed something of their own ideals. In fact, the rector at that stage, Professor H.P. Tom, indicated without any uncertainty that their guest, Senator Kennedy, would not be welcome at Stellenbosch. We now know that Tom was influenced by the former Deputy Minister of Education, who amongst others in 1959 pushed through the Extension of University Education Act. The fact that we had separate universities at that stage was due to that act. The same guy would later become the Minister of Justice and even later the Prime Minister of South Africa. It was of course none other than Advocate John Vorster. He personally phoned the rector at the time to ask the rector to make sure that Kennedy must not visit or set foot on campus. The House Committee stood firm and in fact welcomed Kennedy into the dining hall of the residence for his speech. This would not only have an effect on the student body of Stellenbosch University, but would until this day influence the thinking, the sense of memory, and the culture of Simonsberg. Given the visit and subsequent engagements, Simonsberg would at times thereafter be known as die wit huis met die swart mure, the White House with the black insides, the black walls. Years later, Willem van Drimmelen, I must comment here that van Drimmelen was one of my favorite golfing commentators in the 80s and the 90s. I think you would remember him for that as well. Willem van Drimmelen would remind us that when he first applied for work, marks at the SABC, he was shown a photo of him with Kennedy in front of Simonsberg and asked whether it was indeed him on the photo. Needless to say that he was not appointed at that particular stage. This is of course not to say that the residence would not within its ranks also have strong conservative voices at the time, but the tone was set for an environment that would welcome Lubowski a couple of years down the line. And I see the chair of our council, George Steyn here, his father, Gys Steyn, the first primarius of the residence, also made sure that this tone would keep through and would influence and be influenced by Lubowski. In the context of Simonsberg, Lubowski is remembered as a giant from Namibia. Indeed, Nicola, with a blue car, who made sure that the prim disappeared for a while, and that guy was directly involved in that incident, just to set the record straight. Shell, as the guy who had extra biltong and rusks to share, his big personality, his open and friendly nature, his flamboyant way of being would not only make others like him immediately, but would also guide his career and relations until his death. When Anton left Simonsberg in 1975, apartheid was far from over. Southwest Africa looked very different then from what it would look like in the 1980s and the 1990s and today. But he was ready to make a difference. And this was what he did almost immediately after his studies at Stellenbosch and at UCT. And this is the Anton who had a huge impact on the lives of many, also on the Uppington 25 and many residents of Uppington. It is in this spirit of Anton, like many others, that influences young critical thinkers of our day. Today, Swart Modderweg, now I cannot find a good translation for that, so good luck. Swart Modderweg, the road in Uppington that had historically split the traditional white and black neighborhoods from each other, is renamed after Anton Lubowski. It is today Anton Lubowskiweg. It is the same road that will lead you to Namibia from Uppington, which I think is quite significant. It is interesting to note that as the road leads out of town, just before it leads out of town, it intersects with none other than Aubrey Beker Street. I'm very sure that Anton and Aubrey regularly have a chuckle about the fact that in that way they cross. And in this way the town is fittingly paying homage to both Lubowski and Bekers. And I was very happy to see that very close to Windhoek Hoërskool, there's also a street named after Lubowski. Nicola reminded us that there is a danger, of course a danger of having a single story narrative, which I think is quite important. But it is also important to realize that our stories connect, that our stories in a real way cannot be separated from the stories of others. They connect, they cross lines, intersect we add, we change, we influence. It is in and through our connectedness that our stories become real, that our stories become complete. Might not be perfect stories, it might not be the greatest stories, but they become real in the most significant way through, and perhaps complete through the stories of others. And that, I think, we beautifully heard and sensed this evening. Without ever meeting him, my story is connected to that of Anton Lubowski. And in fact, I remain influenced by him and many others. The question for us is, however, what stories we will write for the future, and what crossings will our stories have, where will our stories meet, and how will our stories interact? And then, what realities will we create through our stories? I thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Uppington seems to be playing a major role tonight. Last year, my wife and I went to the Galagadi Game Reserve, and on our way back, I was driving down Swartmoeder Laan, or road, and I noticed on the side that it had been crossed out, and underneath was Anton Lubowski. And yes, it's quite significant. The change, there's an irony involved there. Thank you very much to our speakers. It was wonderful. And thank you for giving your time to address us on this subject. We hope to have this as an ongoing event, a series of memorial lectures at Stellenbosch University. And now we're going to end off, and I'm going to ask Nadia Lubowski, Anton's daughter, to say a few words. To link you up, Nadia, so here we go. Oops. There we go. That's one. There we go. Thank you.
Sure. While we had our moment of silence, I looked up and I saw my dad's picture. And I'm standing before you today with a huge amount of gratitude. Just filled with so much gratitude for who he was and what he stood for. So thank you to Stellenbosch for having this event. My father lived and died for believing with every cell of his body that humans are equal and deserve the same rights, no matter what color, age, gender, or anything that might be used as a judgment to separate us from each other. In a world like today, where there are so many things to stand up for, climate change, large-scale conflict and wars, inequality, poverty, religious conflicts, government accountability, transparency, and corruption, world hunger, there is still a lot to stand up for because the inequalities remain in our world today. So I remember being a little girl and watching, well, there's many things that I remember, but I remember watching an interview that my dad did where he said, education, education, education. And that is the only thing that's going to make a difference. I know it's only my opinion, but you can blame my father for that one, that I believe that education will make a huge difference in our world today still. And we have to look at education differently of all our young people, children, young people, adults, everyone. So we started in 2009, we started the Anton Lubowski Educational Trust. And have worked in partnership with an incredible organization called PRISA, which was started by Neville Alexander, where we look at, or we work with many township schools looking at early childhood development. But in particular, looking or giving children agency, giving them the sense and the feeling that they are heard, that their voices of the way that they think, the things that they think, and what they think about is actually really valid. And the way we work with that is providing them with stories, providing them with ample opportunity to play, and basically giving them the self-confidence that what I have contributes to something. And that's the only way that we're going to make or develop active citizens. So if anyone would like to hear more about the amazing project that we're doing, please come and speak to me afterwards, because I'd love to tell you more. But without further ado, I just wanted to say thank you. Being the daughter of a father that dies, no matter what age, is hard. Being a daughter of a political activist who was assassinated in front of our home as a young girl of 9 is difficult. Being the daughter of a political activist who was assassinated and murdered, and whose murder was never solved or never explained in any way, is even harder. So besides the memories, heart longings, and inevitable emotional hardships that all would come with, I've also had to always deal with and face the story in various multiple ways, because that part of my life narrative comes up in the public domain on a regular basis. However, that aspect that is inevitable, what it has also given me is like layers of an onion that I've been able to deal with and face his death and what he stood for and the different things that our country have gone through in various ways. And it is partly, his story is so much of who I have become today and what I stand up for. So I would like to thank, on behalf of my family, the university administration that organized this event tonight, the alumni office, the law faculty, in particular the dean, Nicola Smith, to Charles Adams for playing a huge role in organizing the event that's taking place. To the speakers, thank you for your wonderful words. Judge Albie Sachs, dear friend of my father's, Max de Prier, and Leslie van Rooyen. And for all the kind words, recollections, and memories that once again are part of the layers of the onion. To all the guests that are here tonight, I'd also like to thank my family for the crazy, wonderful, amazing people that you are. Thank you to my dad's 2 sisters for so many things. But thank you for remaining such a huge presence in my life. And then I'd also like to thank my mother for tirelessly and never giving up on the legacy that my father deserves. Words cannot describe how grateful I am to know how much you loved him. I express gratitude every day for the fact that you are my mother and that he chose you. Thank you for who you are in my life.
Die appel val beslis nie baie ver van die boom af nie. I recognize the genes. You not only look like your dad, you sound like him too. Folk, thank you very much. We've now come to the end of this evening's formal proceedings. It really has been wonderful having you all here. Please make a mental note. Next year, more or less this time, hopefully we'll have another one. We will now go through here or around there, but you can go through here as well, and we'll have drinks on the side. So thank you very much for attending and travel safely.